Hey there, Keith Marchiano, Senior Executive Coach, Pax8 Academy, and we're talking Sales Pitch Podcast. Welcome back. We're going to continue to dive into Results Selling Framework and understanding the prospect or the client's buying process today. In last week's podcast, we discussed uncovering the prospect needs, really what they're about, starting to understand what their company is, what problems their company is having, what they're looking to do to solve them, what the impact is if they don't do anything about it, right? Those are the key factors that we hit on last week. This week, what we're going to do is continue the conversation to determine, hey, are they a good prospect or not? Do they value IT or not? So as you go through those metrics we discussed last week, this week we're going to discuss more around what's their decision criteria, right? Hey, out of these problems that you had, when are you looking to solve those problems by? Have you all determined what the cost will be or a budget around solving those problems? And then lastly, understand their decision-making process on who in the leadership team will determine who's involved in evaluating options, determining if they made a switch, have they made a switch. We want to get down to the brass tacks today and really understanding the decision-making criteria that they're going to go by. So this is an exciting podcast. Glad to have you back and get ready for Sales Pitch Podcast. All right, welcome back to the Sales Pitch Podcast. It's the Results Selling Framework in understanding the prospect client buying process. And I'm super excited to have back on the broadcast James LaVine. James, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Keith. Thank you for having me back. I really appreciate it. This is fun.
Yeah, you made the cut. You're back again.
I can't believe it.
No, you brought some great energy the last times you've been on the show, and looking forward to having you here and bringing in some more insight to the team here. So, hey, could you do me a favor, just in case somebody didn't catch the last podcast? Can you just give a brief overview, who you are, what you do here?
Sure. Yeah, James LaVine. I'm a senior executive coach for Pax8 Academy. I also owned and operated my own MSP for 25 years in the Phoenix metro area. And I also, parallel, had a marketing agency for 12 years. I'm a big advocate of owner-led sales. I believe that once you've dialed in your sales and your marketing, you should be unstoppable.
Unstoppable. I'm sure everybody listening would love to be unstoppable, right?
That's right.
Hey, so yeah, glad to have you back. So last week, Jeremy and I kind of started with part one of this series. We chatted about asking questions to uncover a prospect or a client's needs and unearth the problems that they're having. Today, we're discussing understanding their buying process, their decision criteria. In your eyes, what's the difference between the two?
Oh, yeah, it's actually a huge difference, right? So asking questions to uncover needs and figuring out what are the challenges, what are they facing versus, okay, you're going to go in and start talking about solutions and ideas and whatever, but if you have no clue of what the buying process looks like for them, which is very specific to their company, their leadership, then you're going to have lots of issues in front of you. If you're going in spouting all your solutions, you have no idea that you're even talking to the right person or what they're going to base their buying decisions on. You're really just going to spin in circles.
Right. So why not ask people those questions first?
Well, it's important that you earn the right to be able to get into the personal side of things, right? It's like saying you're going out and talking to somebody for the first time and say, oh, so Keith, I know we just met, but how much money do you make? And, oh, Keith, tell me about your personal life. And, and all this, it's like, whoa, I don't even know you. And so you have to get into the habit of getting the right to get deeper into how are they going to ask the buying criteria, the right kind of questions. Are you the right kind of fit? There's all these things that are personal, and they're not going to reveal that to you, right, until you've developed that side by asking the questions. You got to earn the right, really.
Oh, man, it's fantastic. Yeah, people buy from people they know, like, and trust. This might be the first time that they're meeting you in person. right? You could have talked to them on the phone before to kind of pre-qualify them, but yeah, you're kind of diving into it. So I love what you said. Like, I always use the dating analogy on this piece. Like, if you were sitting across from somebody, this is your first date, yeah, you definitely wouldn't. One of the first questions you don't ask is like, "Hey, how much money do you make a year?" You probably That's probably not even date three, four, or five, right? That might be closer to marriage, right? Or when they divulge that information. So yeah, I love this. It's like it's getting to know you, feel each other out. Are we compatible? Do I want to work with you? Do you want to work with me? Are you a good fit for us? Yeah, good stuff. I love that.
Well, what's funny is you mentioned, I love the dating analogy. Well, there's a red flag. What if you're the person that somebody says, "Hey, Keith, how much money do you make?" That might be a red flag right there, right? So maybe it's time to move on from that type of relationship.
So, all right. So we talked about, hey, last week, really understanding problems, unearthing the problems. So when we're talking about decision criteria, what are some of the key questions you need, people on the call need to ask and have answered?
Well, there's actually a handful. The first one is, I mean, it seems kind of blaringly obvious, but you got to ask them, how are they going to make this decision, right? Is this a solo person making a decision? Is it a team review, a committee? We got to get down to the basics of every business is different, right? Some people, they know instantly you're the right fit. We've answered all the questions. We got the proof points. The decision made. Others, it might ramble on and on and on. They got review. They got we call them technical buyers, right? So the technical buyer may have a list of questions. And it might be multiple calls, and so we really don't know what we're walking into. So a good way to do this is ask questions. How are we going to make decisions in your business? How are you going to decide? Who else is involved in the decision making process, right? Is Who is going to be on this team review if you're going to have one? And start asking those kind of questions. Another one I like to say is, we've already covered the needs, but of all those needs, what are the two or three that we need to be looking at right now? What's the most important, right? Let's bring it right to the top of the list, because that there could be hundreds of things that you could eventually solve. I mean, that's probably too many, right? Maybe 10, 15. But what are the one or two that's going to actually move the needle for their business? It's going to have the biggest impact. It's going to give them the business outcome they're seeking. And that's going to be, when you're asking those kind of questions, you're getting them to realize we can solve a lot of things, but what's that one linchpin? What's that one that if we solve this, it's going to knock out a whole bunch of pieces for us?
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Let me expand on that. Like, you're in front of, I always joke around. It's like the person that drew the shortest straw, right? You get to, go out and shop for new IT service providers, right? It's typically not that person like we covered in the buying process, usually the technical buyer, the office manager, director of operations. It's somebody whose team is impacted the most, right? And they're going to be your champion. So to ask them the question of like, hey, what's the most important problem that you want to get solved, or most important problems, that just elevates you to their status, but also it makes you an advocate for that person on the other side of the table. I love that, James.
Well, there's a couple more. I want to make sure we hit these because these are, yeah, there's a couple more that you definitely got to hit. And one is, what is their current spend, right? What is their budget for this? Or do they even have a budget? You've got to, we got to be open about talking about numbers. It's critical. Uh, you got to get used to having that conversation. What about a future budget? Uh, and the other one is going to always come down to, let's say we're going to do business, Keith, you and I. How are you going to judge me? What are the metrics or the KPIs? How are you going to judge that I'm doing a good job for you? Did I solve this problem? What is that going to look like to you? Which is very different from what it might look like to somebody else. And you want that to the surface as well, because we need to know exactly how they're going to judge us and the work we've done for them based upon theirs. And here's where it gets really wonderful. And you already know this. Once you've got some of these metrics, you can actually insert yourself into, have you thought about these other ones as well? And these other types of criteria. And you can now start to kind of shape that conversation and help them really understand the value that you're providing for them. So
I love this. And we're going to touch on a few of these later in the conversation, but yeah, spot on, James. Thanks for that. I love the direction. one of the things you said, and I hear partners ask around the question, hey, yeah, who are the people helping you decide to go with, like something of that nature.
Mm.
And I kind of like cringe if I'm in the buyer shoes. I'm like, what, am I not good enough? So you got to be careful there. But from a standpoint of like, what what would you consider probably to clarify for the audience, like what's a better way to find out who the stakeholders are in the company?
Yeah, well, let me just take it. Let me step into the owner's shoes because I was an owner, and I can tell you that if somebody asks me that question, I get a little upset because the first thing is I like to make decisions. I don't need people to make decisions for me or help me make decisions. And so I don't mind getting reviews and information, but ultimately the buck stops with me. That was my perspective as a business owner. And I think as a salesperson, I would want somebody to respect that, right? Read me, understand that, yes, who is going to help you with any type of buying criteria? Who's going to be on the team review? What does that even look like? Those would be some of the basic questions I would be looking at, but I would definitely not be talking about who's going to help you make a decision. That's a red flag.
What if you're talking to, I'm sorry, what if you're talking to like a office manager? What would be the way to make that person feel valid when asking that question? 'Cause I love what you said about the owner side.
Yeah, for sure. So the technical buyer, that's like we'd like to call them, they're information gathering. They've got a list of criteria. They're dealing with the actual daily issues, and they've got these challenges. And they've gone to uh, someone in leadership, the owner, somebody who has tasked them, hey, solve this. And so we engage them by one, figuring out exactly what the current challenges are that they're facing. And then we start to say, well, let's look at if we can get these solved, what would be the next thing? What's the bigger picture that we're trying to drive towards? We could put a band-aid on this, or we can actually go to the healing, solving issue. Where are we trying to take this? What's the actual challenge that you're facing, right? And then give them the information, give them all the pieces so they can dot the I's and cross the T's, give them the data they need so they can go to the decision maker and say, yes, I did my due diligence. So they look good to their boss and they've done their task, but enough that it sparks that conversation with the decision maker and hopefully gets them to the table as well.
Yeah, so when I'm coaching partners, a lot of times, I kind of role play them through this. Is like, you know, hey, thanks for sharing with me these problems. I'm so sorry you're having them.
Mm.
Um, See if we can help. But you know, out of those four problems you mentioned, which ones are most important to you, right? If today's March the what is it, March 18th? When do you want those solved by? Summertime,
Mm.
and get a feedback from the client, the prospect around that. Then once I get that feedback, it's like, okay, so walk me through how decisions are made in the company. Who's from a standpoint of like those problems, who they impact, and how you're going to fix them. Who's all involved in that discussion, right? Besides yourself, right? Get them engaged that way. Then lastly, I'll segue into is like, have you all determined what your budget is for solving that particular or those particular problems? I'm not going into hey, what are you spending on your IT services today? None of that stuff. It's like, what's your
Right.
budget to solve this problem? I want to know that first because most people probably don't have that an idea around that. They're just like, I'm not sure. We haven't really even thought of that. What you're doing is getting people to think like, hey, there's a cost to solve this problem. Then there's a cost to support my business, right?
Mm.
What are your thoughts on that?
I 100% agree. One, we know that it's different for every type of business, right? Some will go right out and start Googling and searching and hunting down a similar problem, maybe give an idea of what it should or shouldn't cost. Um, they do that basic research, right? And they may or may not be accurate. More than likely, they're not because they're missing a lot of criteria that you should be bringing to the table or we would bring to the table, things they haven't considered because we're the experts in that area. But that's definitely something that's critical, right? To understand that everybody's different. Every company you engage is going to be different, and so you've got to spell that out, get it really clearly defined. Otherwise, you're going to have no idea what path to take as you're going and asking questions. And you may be talking to the wrong person completely.
Right. They may be an influencer, but yeah, you need to get at the bottom line. You need to get to somebody who is the economic buyer. You kind of mentioned before
Yeah.
about the owner likes to make decisions. Owners also like to empower their people. So that's a great even though the owner's empowering that person to go out and find more information out, doesn't mean they're going to make the final say, especially if the owner has something else going on. Let's say they're in the middle of acquiring another company and that gets kind of hairy or it gets really heated and ramped up to it happening, right? That could kick you down the curb, months or a year or never, right?
Yeah, big time. Yeah. You might find yourself spinning in the, oh, I'll get that to another time or place, or you get ghosted. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that can happen. So, yeah, 100%.
Sure. Yep, absolutely. I love what you said about metrics. I'm going to dive into that a little bit more,
Mm,
right? So, we just
okay.
talked about, hey, not, partners not asking the right way around, stakeholders and budgets and stuff like that. But I rarely hear an IT company or IT provider say they ask questions around, what does the client want? What's the metrics that they're going to hold us accountable to? What's the problem with an IT provider or a partner of ours just not asking what's important to the prospect and the metrics to hold us accountable?
Yeah. The biggest one is there's an assumption on the MSP's part or the provider's part that they're just going to assume that they're doing a good job, right? They have no idea what the criteria is if whether or not they even did a good job. So they're just going to make this assumption, and then here's your invoice, and then they wonder why the person's unhappy or there's some other issue, and it's because in the buying decision there was a secret criteria that was never asked or brought to the surface, and I think that's another reason why a lot of deals fall through, or I'll call you later, never hear back from them, or I'll think about it, or all these other things. And it really helps if you get that to understand how are they going to hold your feet to the fire? How are they going to gauge your success? What does success look like to them when you implement this? How when they solve this issue, when you solve this issue for them, what does good look like? How are they going to gauge you? And that's a question that a lot of times they may not openly tell you. They may not even fully understand that consciously, but you have to ask questions to let's get to the numbers. Is it going to be that your systems are up longer or faster response time when something goes down versus XYZ, whatever it happens to be, whatever they say it is, that's the criteria. And once you know that criteria, well, it makes your job a thousand times easier, and it helps you sell the deal because now you're going to hold me accountable, and I know exactly how to make sure that you are satisfied as my client, as my customer.
Yeah, if somebody tells you, "Hey, I need you to drive to Timbuktu," and you don't have a map or Waze or any like that stuff, how are you going to get there, right? We don't know how high to jump, right? How high they expect us to jump, right? So I really like this. And you said it perfectly, right? A lot of this stuff typically stalls in the sales process, or the client starts regretting their decision if they decide to go with you, and might be a short-term relationship, right? We need to be provable, quantifiable, and not only with these metrics, but also the metrics that they set. I love what you said before too. What was it? Kind of guide them with some of those things, right? Guide
Yeah.
them with some of the metrics that we know we already measure, right? What are Can you kind of get into some of those? What are some of those metrics that you would
Well,
advise
yeah.
on?
Let me. I want to go back to your driving analogy because I think it's to me it's perfect. Right. It's important to remember that you as the salesperson, you who you're guiding them, you're leading them. They're in their car, they're along for the ride. Don't just assume they're going to grab the wheel and start driving. You got to take control of it and start asking the right kind of questions. And that's important that you're leading the conversation. And as you start asking questions around response times or what does success look like for them when you solve this problem? Let's say, for example, the computers are intermittently crashing every time somebody prints. Okay, well, is that the number one issue we need to solve, or is there something bigger here going on? Is there, and then you get into how do we stabilize your network? What else is happening? And ultimately, you ask them, okay, so we solve this. How do we know, or how should we know that if we did a good job for you? what does that look like to you? And have them define that for you. It could be something as simple as like, hey, our computers will never crash again whenever we print. Or when somebody runs the copier, we have a big power spike. It's not going to like crash all the systems because we've got everybody on APC backups or whatever. It could be something that simple, but we have to get to the brass tacks, the bottom of all this, and just ask them, what does it look like? Another one could be response times. Our IT provider that we currently have, they don't respond. They want us to send them an email. We have issues right now. I think success means you're going to pick up the phone and do a first call resolution, or you're going to answer quickly and you're going to solve this the first time because our current provider can't even solve this like the fifth, sixth, seventh time. And that's ridiculous. Maybe that's success. Okay. Then you solve the challenges they're facing around that, knowing that's your criteria.
Yeah, and if you know those stats off your hand, like, I mean, we already coach our partners around like, hey, we call response times within 12 minutes, right? That's a response time. If you already know your first call resolution percentage, like if that's 97% and you can spit that out, right? You're forcing the competition to a higher level of accountability that they cannot prove, but you can. You can bring those stats rolling back at you, right? If you have like, hey, a higher percentage of security prevention and you have that measured, I love it. If you have these measurements already in your quiver, you can go ahead and shoot them, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and that's also important to note. I love that you brought that up too, because you've got to know your quantifiable, provable metrics, the things that you already do great at your business, at your MSP. And that should be not just some secret service thing that the service partner knows, but all of sales should know that. That should be understood. This is how we stand out. This is what we're great at. This is our superpower as an MSP. And know those numbers, know those metrics. So when you're having these conversations, you can make sure those get interjected into the conversation of, have you considered this as a possible measure of success? Because that's already your strong point. And that's where you can drive them towards that.
Boy, I love that. So yeah, by addressing all of their buying decision criteria, you're not only proving your value, but that you're the only IT provider that can provide a solution in a manner that they need, right? You've got stats. We'll get into that when we start talking about articulating needs and differentiation in the next week's podcast. But and then also proof points in the future. But yeah, this kind of starts setting that stage, right, James? You start dropping some things of like how kind of painting that vision of how you're going to be better than what you have now.
Yeah, 100%. And so I like to pull it all together and say, look, I understand who I'm talking to. I'm making sure they have value. But it's not just words, right? I can prove it. Here's how we are different from our competition or from other MSPs out there. Here's how we've done it before in the past. And when you pull all that together and you get your proof points, why would they not want to do business with you?
Yeah, especially like if you're subject matter expert, if you can kind of show them, confidently that you've done it before, right? So I'd like, like when decision criteria, I'd like to ask a couple questions. I'll give everybody kind of some bonus material here. This is free stuff, so write this down if you have a pen and paper. But I always like asking the question, especially when they're like really dumping on their current provider. I want to ask the question like, boy, this sounds horrible what you're going through. What have they said about this? What have they done about this? Nothing. They haven't said anything, haven't done anything. Do they know you're looking for a new provider? And then I hit them with the the right hook, right? Is there any chance that you're going to stay with them? And I want to be quiet and I want to hear the word no. Anything besides no comes out of their mouth, I want to recap all those problems and all the impact those problems are having on the company, and just saying I'm curious here. Why would you want to stay? You want to dig deeper. You want to ask qualifying questions to seek the truth out of this piece. The other one I love asking, James, is when I'm somewhere in the somewhere in this decision criteria, I want to ask them like, hey, how do you make money? Like who refers you the most business? And I don't want to hear word of mouth, right? Who's if they say word of mouth, I'm asking whose words, whose mouth? Like who specifically refers you business? What do they look like? And I just want to, every IT service provider out there, you have clients and you have people that you're meeting with. Like nothing better than if the opportunity goes stale, if they do decide to postpone, or it's a decision they're not making for a while, that you have, who was a good referral for them. If you sent them a referral during this process, holy smokes. Can you imagine the impact, but not only that, the advantage you would have over your competition by doing that?
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Because, it's funny. We as human beings, by our very nature, when somebody does something nice for us, we almost feel compelled to do something in return. And when you're the person who's giving them business to help them grow their business, you just went up like 5, 10 notches in their book, because it's not about you trying to get money from them. You're actually helping them make money. That's huge, Keith. Huge. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, we're talking. I mean, during this, a lot of the stuff that we've been talking this podcast and the last one was like, hey, what questions and why should we ask them? Like, just don't forget to be human when you're in front of somebody, right? We talked about that during rapport. It's just like let them know your personal side, let them know you care, and if you are involved with your existing clients and in the business community, and you are bouncing into a whole bunch of different business owners, let's always like, hey, small business, let's help each other out. Let's introduce each other to people that can help each other's business, right?
Yeah, 100%.
So so from a standpoint, any final points on understanding the prospect or client buying process that you want to kind of tie a bow around here?
Yeah, I mean, we covered most of it. Just to kind of recap, it's important that we ask the right kind of questions to understand who you're talking to, that they're going to have unique buying processes, right? So just don't make any assumptions. Ask questions around that. Find out exactly what are the 1 or 2 things that they need to fix now, that solve now, that's going to move the needle, that's going to make the biggest impact now. And make sure that's clearly defined, right? By asking even more questions, going deeper into that. Make sure you know that they have a budget, and if what that is, and are they planning to budget to fix this problem, and getting to that conversation and have questions around that. And definitely make sure that, like you mentioned, the timeliness of it all. Make sure that this is something that they do want to fix, not like 2 years from now, but we're budgeted and it's ready to go. We need that urgency behind that, and ask questions, right? If it's not, then maybe you're barking up the wrong challenge that they're facing, and maybe it's not the number 1 or number 2. Maybe it's number 4 on the list, and you haven't really uncovered the top challenge that they need to fix now, and that they're willing to put money behind. And I found that to be the case many times. Sometimes they don't even know what it really is because they've shopped around. They have an idea, and you've got to do your due diligence. Ask the right kind of questions. Dig deep. Do not be afraid. You're going in, and I like to say, during this process here, you're creating a space of clarity for them. Right now, they're scrambling, they're running and gunning. They got this business. They got 1,000 things they're trying to do. And when you ask the right kind of questions, you're calming their mind down. You're slowing them down to where they can start thinking clearly. They can process the questions. They can really get a handle on what's going on in their business. And then that actually lifts you up to that highest level of partner possible. Not just the trusted advisor, but a true partner who genuinely cares about their business. And now you are the expert that they've been looking for.
Way to tidy that up. I'll say this too, from a standpoint, I'll get your feedback. Like, you definitely want to ask these questions on the first meeting, your first interjection, that first time appointment. You might not get all the answers to those questions the first time. That may flow into a second meeting, like a second discovery meeting, where maybe you bring an engineer out to kind of take a look at the technical side as well. That's how to keep the conversation going, right? Just if you have the office manager there and they're the technical buyer, but not the economic buyer, and we need to get that economic buyer to the table, right? What a better way to get them there is like you ask some good questions that person can't answer, and we need somebody else's help. Be like, hey, no problem. We need to get back together again. We're going to do, an assessment or an evaluation in your network, and I'd like to meet with everybody. I used to kind of throw out like some sort of non-negotiable people doing business with me. Like my company was really into IT strategy, and we do strategic business reviews, and we made it a non-negotiable for our clients that you had to meet with us at least once a year. And because of that, at the next meeting, I need to meet with all the stakeholders to get their buy-in around that negotiable. Because if they're not, I understand maybe we're not a good fit. And that's the other point too, is that you may get an answer that you don't like, right? They might not have a budget. They might be paying pennies to their current provider. It might not be a fit from a budgetary standpoint. Guess what? If they don't have any problems, if you ask these questions and they don't have any problems, you need to ask questions like, well, it doesn't sound like you have any problems. Why am I here? Right? They might be just kicking the can around and seeing like, hey, I'm price shopping my current vendor or the agreement's up, right?
Yep.
Thoughts around that stuff? I wanted to kind of sprinkle that in as probably, real world stuff. I wanted to throw that out there.
That's very real world. That's very common. I was just talking to a couple of partners that I coached the other day, and they had that exact same thing, a lot of price shopping. Yeah, it's just, we're kind of doing our annual, so we just want to see what kind of service you would offer, but ultimately there was nothing there. The second they went through some of these questions you just mentioned, it was clear that they were price shopping their current IT provider. There was no intention of switching, and basically it would have been a waste of everyone's time to go out and have all these multiple meetings. That's another reason why we ask all these questions up front and get down to what is the true buying process and cover this stuff. Because like you just said, you could be totally wasting your time. There's no intention, there's no budget, there's no problems for them to solve. Why are we talking? What's the point of all this? So,
exactly. Yeah, good stuff, James. Well, awesome. Thanks for being here. Really appreciate your insight and value. Can't wait to have you back, my friend.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot, Keith, for having me here. I love this. I love what you're doing. I love this podcast. I love how you're putting out good information. And hopefully through all this, the MSPs out there and the people selling, they're going to get a clear idea of how do we get results from our actual selling process? How do we make this really happen? And so thanks for just putting it all out there, Keith. I appreciate it.
That's why it's called Results Selling Framework, right? It's what we want. We want these IT providers, our partners, to get results, to win business. And at the same time, like you said, hey, we don't want to waste our time if they're not a good fit. So for you, the partner, listening to these last two podcasts might seem like you're going to be asking a lot of questions. From a standpoint, you may be, but if you're not asking questions and the prospect and client is, and you're just talking about what you do, you're not in control of the conversation. You don't have your hands on the steering wheel. You're not in the driver's seat. The reason they ask those questions and they ask questions of you is because they have a specific problem with their current situation. And they may already know the answer because a competitor set it up and hoping that you would fail and talk about yourself. So by asking good questions that pertain to the buyer and helps you understand their business, this puts you in control of that conversation. It will allow you to communicate value throughout the sales process, give you answers to how they make decisions, what they care about the most, what problems they need to fix in order to grow their business, improve operations, minimize risk, have a competitive edge. So when you eventually get to deliver a proposal, you will have the ammo you need, and you'll focus that proposal on the problems they have, the impact to their company. And then, boom, put the nail in the coffin. This is how we're going to fix them and why. This will dramatically reduce the let me think about it, the ghosting, and the bad news when they eventually call you back and say they stayed with their current provider or went with a competitor, right? We want you to win more business. Next week, we're going to have Jason Duvall on the show. He's going to discuss articulating your value and differentiation as we continue the results selling framework here in the podcast series of Sales Pitch Podcasts. So we'll see you next week.